talk about where we were, where we're going, things we can do differently, and I'll let Sarah introduce herself as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Mearhoff. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Communications for the Associated General Contractors of Vermont. So we're the Vermont chapter of a nationwide association that represents the whole of the construction industry. And here in Vermont, that means that we have more than 200 members, general contractors, and folks affiliated with the construction industry. And we're trying to build a better Vermont. And of course, as you all know, that includes housing, which is kind of the foundation of everything. So do you want to talk maybe a little bit about some of the work that was done this past legislative session? And of course, Senator Mattos, before he was a state senator, he was also a House member. Yeah. So he has history going back. So maybe let's talk about recent history.
Yeah. So over the past, I've been in the House, I was there 7 years, and then this past year I was moved over to the Senate. So I've been around for 8 years now, and housing has always been a key issue in the State House, and we haven't seen really population growth until COVID happened, where we had migration into the state, and that was I think it was 8,000 to 10,000 people over the last 10 years. But what we're finding is that people are staying in their houses longer because we're an aging population. We have people that are, instead of 2, 3, 4 people living in a dwelling unit, you're having 1, maybe 2 people live in a dwelling unit. So when you hear that there's a housing shortage, but our population isn't going up, it's because how we're treating housing is differently. People are living alone and things like that. So what we've done in the legislature just this past year is the CHIP program. So it's Community Housing Infrastructure. And has anybody heard of the TIF program in here? It's a very complicated program, but it's a very useful tool for your municipalities to utilize this TIF program to grow their grand list. So it encourages development in areas. Milton, for instance, we had 2 of them, and one of them was actually able to bring in Husky to Milton, and that was about 300 employees, and they're still there thriving today. And what that does is it freezes your grand list at a point in time, and then you're able to use the increment on the increase in those tax bills to be able to help fund the financing of your infrastructure. So what CHIP did for this infrastructure program, some people would call it like a mini TIF, where you could have smaller municipalities, because they are very labor intensive to administer and be able to follow and audit and things like that. So the CHIP program will allow smaller municipalities to be able to utilize this tool to help private developers increase the housing supply in Vermont. And that will, usually the hardest things to get going off the ground are your roads, your sewers, your water, getting that done before you can even put a shovel in the ground to build the house to be able to sell or rent. So what this program will do will make it more attainable for municipalities and developers to be able to utilize this mini TIF CHIP program to be able to expand our housing inventory in Vermont. And I was on the what is it called, conference committee for the Senate side. Yeah, I know, I did. It was a good time. So we got involved. It's going to be a $2 billion investment over 10 years, which is the biggest investment, I think, that we've had. And it's all in retaining part of a tax bill. And so it's not going to be money out of our pockets. Some will say that it's money out of the education fund, but that development wouldn't have ever happened anyway, so the money never would have been there. So this is going to be a great tool to be able to grow our grand list, and more importantly, be able to grow our housing in Vermont, that I'm really looking forward to. And I think Sarah can probably touch on it a little bit more.
Yeah. One of the things that I think was so forward-looking about the CHIP program is that it was in part a reaction to this kind of reality that we've all seen across Vermont, which is that our largest communities are able to kind of either foot these bills or administer these programs, and there's a lot of disparity, honestly, between the kind of haves and have-nots in the state of Vermont. Burlington will always be able to find money in some couch cushion somewhere, right, to be able to finance their next high-rise. That is not always the case in a place like St. Johnsbury, maybe, or, I don't know, rattle some off for me.
Milton's pretty good at finding money, but our smaller towns that are around the state, maybe a smaller Swanton or Sheldon up in Franklin County, doesn't have the town resources to be able to go through a big TIF project.
Yeah, and we know that we need perhaps fewer actual units in some of these smaller communities. Some of these tiny communities of 300 or so people don't necessarily need the 150 unit high-rise that's going up in downtown Burlington, but they do need a duplex. They do need maybe a quadplex, something like that. Something that very essential is that it fits the character of the local community and it has community buy-in. But so many of these communities are finding that it's really difficult to finance these projects. It's really expensive to build in rural Vermont, and to kind of get that last mile. And I say that hypothetically, it's not always an actual mile, but that kind of last mile of infrastructure. So that's what we're talking about with CHIP, is the roads, the sewer line, or the septic, the water, the electric, the fiber, sidewalks, if appropriate, that sort of thing. So I think CHIP was a great response to what we've been seeing, a dynamic across Vermont, is that some of our larger municipalities are making way. I mean, I think they still have work to do. Certainly, it's not like things are sunny and perfect in our larger communities, but there's a widening gap, I would say, between the large and the smaller. And CHIP, I think, was a really good response to that. What's on your mind this coming legislative session in terms of where do we go from here? We just had this historic $2 billion over 10-year future investment. Again, I want to emphasize that it's not like $2 billion just straight out of our pockets. It's leveraging hypothetical growth down the road. But what's next, would you say?
Yeah, I think next year is going to be definitely a pivotal year for housing. And it's not always about the money. We don't always have to put money out there for developers, nonprofits to apply for and get grants. It's things about regulations, whether it's Act 250, wetlands. I mean, so I'm in residential real estate. I do property management. I sell houses. I do excavation. And what I'm seeing out there is I have one client who wants to build a house. Septic's already there. Well's already there. They want to build a house on the property. Found out where they wanted to build their house. Engineer came out and said, "Oh, there's a wetland right there." And well, it is a little low-lying area, so he's got to move his house ahead another 50 feet, which kind of changes what he wanted to do on the property. So it's things like that are popping up out there where we need to, instead of a 50-foot buffer, maybe it's a 25-foot buffer. I know the governor's put out an executive order to be able to freeze those in certain areas. I think it's Tier 1, 1A, and 1B. Being able to freeze those wetlands and be able to spur development. I was talking to a manufacturer who wants to develop a large parcel of property, and they have to take away a swath of 100 feet of their land for 300 feet long because there's a little ditch that runs through it. So if we could tighten those boundaries up for wetlands in a smart way, in a way to be able to promote growth and be able to use these areas around the state that want to see growth, because this wasn't Chittenden County that this development was going to happen. It was up in Lamoille County, which I would say would need that development to be able to increase their workforce up there, and then with that would be housing. So we would need more housing up there, and that's where the CHIP program also comes back into play, where being able to expand that. So it's not always about the dollars and cents. It's about making regulation more attainable for the developer to be able to build those units for people to live in. And the thing is that all that takes time and money, going through Act 250 or wetlands delineations, engineers. Going through all that is a lot of money before you even put a shovel in the ground, and that all gets passed on to the consumer. When we talk about affordable housing, when I started in real estate, it wasn't, it was about 10 years ago, and you could buy a house for $200,000, but you were up in Highgate, and it was a new construction. Now, in Highgate, that house is probably $350,000, $400,000, and that's not attainable. I mean, I bring it back to childcare. The income guidelines for childcare to be able to qualify for a subsidy is lower than the income required to actually buy a house in Chittenden County. the median house. So you are automatically, if you're living in Chittenden County, buying a median house, you will not qualify for the subsidy. And I'll tell you that, childcare, I have 2 of them there, a 1 and a 3-year-old, and it's about $37,000 a year. So being able to create that housing at a price point that's actually attainable for folks not just in Chittenden County but around the whole entire state is huge by using regulations that can be relaxed and be able to spur on the development. And I think the governor's done a really good job with his executive order being able to freeze those wetlands, spur some development, and also looking forward into this next year, continuing on putting those wetlands regulations into law to be able to go in perpetuity, because right now, even with the Act 250 with the tiers, that's only temporary. That's not permanent. That can revert back. I think it's 2 years. 27. That's going to revert back to what it is now. So we need to push forward as a caucus in the House and Senate to be able to get those things over the line, so they go ahead into the future years and not just stop in 2 years.
To kind of add on to the point that we can't buy our way out of the housing crisis, there was a joint hearing between the House and Senate this week where they talked about the housing landscape right now. And it largely focused on the kind of fallout from developments happening in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you guys have heard about this little government shutdown that we're in the midst of. And so there was quite a bit of talk about how that affects grants and, housing vouchers and things like that. But the kind of takeaway that I took from this joint hearing was that funding from DC can be volatile. It can change with an administration or with policy changes, and we can't bet on it. We certainly can never bet on a kind of, windfall that Vermont saw in the COVID years and immediate past. We're never gonna, in our generation, to be perfectly frank, get that kind of cash from DC, and we can't buy our way out of this. If we could, we would have already, frankly. And so the next logical takeaway is that since we can't buy our way out, we have to make it cheaper to build. We have to make it cheaper. We have to make it easier. We have to ease the regulations and restrictions on builders. One thing that we can never quantify or know with certainty is the number of housing projects that we would have if not for all of these regulations that we have in place. Because I will tell you, as someone who works with builders, that a lot of them they see an open field and they live in their communities, they live here, right? And they know that, God, we could really use the housing. We could really use some young families and young workers moving in here. Wouldn't that be a lovely, development, a cul-de-sac, whatever? And then they know just by hearing or looking or reading the room that it's just going to be such a lift to actually, again, get a shovel in the ground and actually even get to the point where you can build. And they say, nah, not for me. Like that's just too heavy a lift. I'm not going to do that. We will never know how many would-be housing units we would have in the state if not for this kind of, I would say, a chilling effect that we have on developers. It's impossible to quantify, and it's a real shame. And I, for one, am not comfortable living in that kind of liminal would-be space at this point. I think it's high time that we move forward, and we decide that we need to move past that, could be, would be mindset into actually making this work and getting more units on the ground so that young people like us, we're both young, can live here and stay here. You brought up Act 250, and I'm glad that you did, because the interim exemptions are indeed set to expire in 2027. For me personally, that's one of my first priorities once we get back in that cursed building in January, is moving out those interim exemptions, because the good news in all of this, I know it seems like a lot of doom and gloom, the good news is that we know that those interim exemptions have worked. There's been some really good news coverage of that. We know that it has spurred growth and it has made it easier to build. And so we should keep those good times rolling. And some people may think, they expire in 2027. Isn't this a 2027 problem? No, because builders are trying to schedule out their building agendas and plans I can assure you, much further than just 1 year out. And they need that certainty that they're going to be able to build those projects that they want to build in those areas, and they're not going to have to jump through, flaming hoops of fire in order to do it. So that's a really high priority for us this coming legislative session. We can't kick the can on that one, or else, again, we're going to get stuck in this kind of doom spiral of would-be projects that can't get off the ground because people think it's just not worth it for me to try that. So.
And one thing I'll add just on the Act 250 is that what happens with Act 250, before these interim exemptions was a developer would look at a piece of land that's prime for, 25 units. And they would look at it and say, well, I could build 9 today because I wouldn't trigger Act 250 and I wouldn't have to wait 1-2 years, go through all the process. So what I saw in my experiences was underdeveloped, underutilized land that could really spur development because developer would not want to go through that headache of Act 250 when they could get it on the ground, get it up running. Because in the housing market, things, we think they move slow, but they move pretty fast. This year I've seen houses that were still going under contract in a couple of days over asking, and now 3 months later, houses are sitting on the market longer, prices are getting corrected, they're coming down. And what I'm finding with the Act 250 is just underutilizing that land where you could actually build more units, but developers don't want to, risk that money and put it out there for the time. And when they think they're going to sell a house at $400,000 and then the time comes around and it's only worth $350,000, that could be make or break on a development. So being able to keep those interim exemptions in place going forward after 2027 is going to be huge. And I think we got about 10 more minutes. I didn't know if Sarah wanted to open it up. If anyone had any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, ideas, we're going to be back in the building in January. And I'm always, my number one goal is to listen to everybody and anybody. And I see a hand up in the back if she wants to come up. I sure can. Thank you. Suzanne, was it? Yes. You bring up a very good point that about the senior housing. I'll touch upon that first. Senior housing is rarely talked about, and when I do my work in Milton, and right now, yesterday, I manage a senior housing 55 plus community. It's all duplex styles, so you just share one wall with somebody. And I've sold a few in there recently, and they are gone in about 2-3 days. And they're selling for good money, and exactly what Suzanne was talking about is that people are staying in their houses longer, and that could be recouped by a family moving in or whatnot. And that is something that needs to be talked about more, because not everybody wants to go to an assisted living facility. They still want their own space. They still want to be able to, do whatever they want without having to be in an apartment complex. They want to be able to have their own smaller house where they don't have to maintain maybe the lawn or the driveway or what have you. And to your first point about Airbnbs, there is a report that's going to come out, I believe this year, that will kind of look at what those short-term rentals are, because a lot of talk in the State House is making a new classification in the grand list for those short-term rentals and taxing them at a higher rate. I don't know if that's the best way to go, because there are Vermonters that have invested in short-term rentals before any of this was talked about. in being able to provide another means of income, whether it's a ADU on their property or buying a place that's in, like Stowe or Sugarbush or where have you. So the verdict for me is still out on short-term rentals. I think the biggest thing that I would like to see is being able to just provide more housing to be able to get people into a rental or purchasing a property that's more affordable for them without having to put an additional burden on somebody that's utilizing their property as a short-term rental. Because, what was it, last 2 years ago, there was that 3% surcharge put on, and one of our biggest industries in Vermont is tourism. And what we're finding is that people do really like having their own space, being able to go to that short-term rental, be able to cook their meal, hang out, and there's a lot of cool amenities at these things. So verdict's still out for short-term rentals for me. I'm really eager to get that report back to see kind of what that percentage is, because long-term rentals are definitely needed. Oh yeah, Sarah.
Back to the note of senior housing, I live in Berry City. I live in my 120-year-old house because of new construction. And that's because the old owners of my house were a couple in their 70s. They couldn't maintain their 3-bedroom, 120-year-old house anymore. And they built a new house. They, downsized to a smaller place that was built right on the outskirts of Berry Town. They are the second to, I've been to their house. They are the second to last house in that development. That's how close I was to not getting my house. So this is a pretty near and dear topic to me, frankly, because I frankly would not have been able to buy my home that I love so much and start the rest of my life with my husband if it were not for new construction. And who knows how many more homes there could be opened up to folks like my husband and I, if that were only possible. We look around our neighborhood, and it's not, I'm not trying to rag on folks in their golden years or anything, obviously, but our street is filled with folks who are retired and they have 2-3 empty bedrooms in their homes, and I would really love to see, maybe a little bit more intergenerational-ness to the neighborhood, and just allow the foot in the door for folks like me to be able to start the rest of our lives. So CHIP doesn't necessarily allow a bypassing of Act 250. It's not on the regulatory side, it's on the financing side. And in terms of, it's not injecting money so much as it's leveraging future revenues. And so it's not as if we're, writing kind of a blank check on the...
No, so CHIP will come into effect this coming year, so we haven't seen the results of that program yet. But what we're finding is that it's not going to be able to bypass Act 250. Generally, these projects may be taking place in a Tier 1A, Tier 1B area that can spur more development by having those interim exemptions for Act 250. Even instead of 10 houses, you can have 25 of them. And being able to retain that portion in the CHIP program for the infrastructure to satisfy the debt is what's going to help create a lower cost of housing. And I think one thing that you're talking about is, cost per square foot is one of your big things that you brought up in your question. I mean, we saw on the news the other day, the affordable housing that was opened down the street, what was it, South Burlington? It was about $500,000 for a 1 unit, which is completely unattainable. You're in an apartment building and it's $500,000, $550,000. I can say that a private developer can get that number down a lot lower. And I think to your point, to bring prices down even more is going to be getting a workforce, which we need housing for. By having a larger workforce in the trades is one of my big things. A lot of my good friends have their own companies, electricians, plumbers, and they're busier than ever. So if we make it affordable to come to Vermont and bring more tradespeople in, because that is an aging demographic, those folks in the trades, and I think Sarah could probably talk about that more. But the prices that are out there for the trades right now, just from 8-10 years ago, are astronomical, and I think that's part of the big problem for the higher cost in housing. There's two portions of CHIP. One will be affordable housing, which you could retain more of that increment, so you'd pay down that loan faster, or you can just have market rate, whether it's a rental or selling. So there's going to be two different lanes for CHIP. Wait. Oh, it is 9:30, and we were supposed to stay right on time. Patty is keeping track of that today, and I don't want to upset Patty first thing in the morning. So I thank everybody for being in here, listening to Sarah and I talk, and we look forward to the rest of the day, and thanks for coming out today.